just remind everyone we're going to continue by Zoom this semester. The next two seminars are next week and the following week from two new postdocs in the MVZ, Austin Patton next week, and then Simon Scarpetta the following week. So we look forward to those talks. Okay, but today it's my great pleasure to introduce Onja Razafindratsima, who's speaking to us today, and she is, of course, a new professor at Berkeley in Integrative Biology. She did her undergraduate work in Madagascar, where she continues her research, but got her PhD at Rice University in Texas, and then continued with a postdoc at Rice, and then a postdoc in conservation biology at Harvard, before joining the faculty at South Dakota State University, where she was for, I believe, 2 years. Before you're muted there.
Okay, yeah.
You have to unmute yourself to give the talk. Before joining our faculty here. So we're thrilled to have you here. We really are excited. And she has a very active research program on lemurs in Madagascar with a focus on their ecology and in particular, their role as seed dispersers. And given her active research program that involves field work on mammals with a strong interest in conservation, she's a natural fit to the MVZ. And so we are happy to consider her as an MVZ affiliated faculty member. And once we are grateful that you're willing to come and give us a talk by Zoom this semester. So I'll hand it over to you and take it away.
Okay. You can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you very much, Michael, for the introduction and for inviting me to give a talk today. And I'm very excited. I'm actually on the 5th floor of VLSP. If you want to, like, if anyone would like to meet in person sometime. And as Michael already said, I've been working on lemur seed dispersal or lemur ecology. I've been studying like various aspects of lemur ecology in Madagascar rainforest for more than a decade. And a lot of my work has been field work based on the present day lemur species. But I've also been using some data on traits of extinct species from museum collections. And so I've done research looking at lemur community ecology to determine the mechanism that shape the coexistence of various species of lemurs across Madagascar, both in present day and in the past, including current and extinct species. I've also been interested in the responses of lemurs to anthropogenic disturbances, like the impact of habitat fragmentation and invasive species on their behavior and foraging pattern. But the one topic that I've been devoting a large proportion of my work has been their interactions with plants, especially the interaction between lemur frugivores and the plants that they consume in the form of providing seed dispersal services. So I'll talk more about that today, but I'd be happy to discuss other lemur-related topics in the future. And so these lemur frugivores disperse the seeds of the plant that they consume by eating the fruits whole and then passing intact seeds through their gut, basically through their feces. And I've been conducting most of my work at Rainforests National Park, which is an evergreen rainforest in the southeastern part of Madagascar, as you can see with the red over here. And Rainforests is home to 13 different lemur species, varying in size and in ecology. We have the really small mouse lemurs and very large lemurs would be the Propithecus over here. But my focus has been on three large lemurs. So these three over here. And one of my students in my lab, Vero, has recently started working on the Mars lemurs. So she can give you more details about that in a future talk, but I will focus on this presentation on the seed dispersal of Lemur and Pharesia. So I've been working on Lemur refrufrans, Lemur preventer, and Pharesia variegata editorum. These are the largest frugivores in Ranoma fauna, but also this genera are the largest frugivores in Madagascar overall. And they are able to disperse the seeds of many plant species with a wide range of size from the small ones to the large ones. But because they are the largest frugivores in the system, they are the primary responsible for the dispersal of the large seeded plant species. And previous studies have shown that the seeds defecated by these lemurs had higher germination rate than the non-defecated seeds. So basically, they can improve the germination success of the seeds that they disperse. And I focus on the seed dispersal by lemurs because the majority of plants in Madagascar have traits that are adapted for seed dispersal by vertebrates and mostly by lemurs. For example, in the rainforest of Ranoma National Park, up to 87% of the trees and large shrubs are dispersed by vertebrates. And the majority of these are primarily dispersed by lemurs. And so I find these interactions between frugivores and plants very fascinating, especially because I like thinking about like how frugivores can help plants in many ways, but most importantly, it could influence plant population dynamics. And ultimately, that can help maintain plant diversity and have some impact on the ecosystem function, so the health of the ecosystem in general. But and also because of that important role that they have, the loss of these key seed dispersers, or even just the absence of these dispersers from a certain area, could have some negative impact on the plants and the ecosystem health in general. So I'm going to talk about these two main points and how like the lemurs will contribute to this, like have this impact on plants at multiple levels, and what are the effects of their loss. So the first point I will talk about is how does lemur-mediated seed dispersal influence the population, the tree populations and communities? One of the main characteristics of seed dispersal by animal frugivores is that it could be biased towards certain areas because they forage and use the habitat in a very non-random way. So, for example, the case of the lemur refrufrans, one of the lemur species my research is focusing on, that tends to turn back to their previous location. And even if they move around the whole day, starting at one point, so for example, this will be their path in one day. So they will start at one point and end another point. Even if they do that, they always return to certain trees for feeding and resting. So they go to one point, go back to where they were before, and so on and so on. So basically, they repetitively use the same route within their habitat with frequent reuse of certain trees. And so by doing that, they may deposit seeds into these frequently used areas. And this non-random dispersal of seeds could be critical for some plant species because they may reach various microhabitats that are suitable for their germination this way. And also it can promote species coexistence and the maintenance of plant diversity because it may influence the recruitment success by limiting the frequency and diversity of interactions between the dispersed seeds and the neighbor, as well as the interaction of the seed with the abiotic environment where they land. For the impact at the population level, we can look at the effect on recruitment, specifically how many of the dispersed seeds will survive to become seedlings. This can go on into looking at how many of the seedlings will survive to become adult, but I haven't been able to go that far yet. So I was only looking at the seedling stage. And so for this part, we were looking at the seedling recruitment of the seeds of Cryptocarya crassifolia dispersed by the free lemur species in the rainforest of Ranmafan. And this plant species is a long-lived canopy tree with large-sized seeds of about 2 centimeters in diameter. And to look at the effect of the seed dispersal on recruitment, we parameterized probability recruitment models using data from observation of seed dispersal patterns and data on how these patterns influence sapling recruitment. And so these data were obtained through daily observation of lemur feeding and defecation for 8 groups of each of the lemur species for 1 year, and also by conducting a 3-year experiment in different microhabitats where the seeds were dispersed. And as a result, we found that the seed dispersal by these free lemur species increased seedling recruitment. So the graph I'm showing here shows the probability of recruitment per seed by each one of the free lemur species, and then compare that with the one that were not dispersed, but simply falling under the parent tree. And so as you can see here, we found an estimated 4-fold higher recruitment probability for seeds that were dispersed by the lemurs than the seeds that were not dispersed. The main reason for this observation and this pattern is because lemurs tend to deposit seeds in microhabitats that are suitable for the germination of this specific plant species, and specifically under macrohabitats that have more open canopy and away from parent plants. So I'm going to show that pattern. So when looking at the pattern of seed dispersal by the free lemur species relative to the canopy cover of the microhabitat where the seeds were defecated, we found that the seeds were mostly dispersed on the gaps. So as you can see here, specifically for like the 2 lemurs, they tend to deposit seeds in gaps. And all 3 lemur species deposit seeds in medium shaded areas, and like all of them deposit less seeds in the shaded area in the forest. And another suitable microhabitat would be being dispersed away from the parent trees or away from conspecifics, because competition and interactions with similar natural enemies might be high near parents and conspecific. So the graph here shows the proportion of dispersal events by each of the 3 lemur species under Cryptocarya trees compared to what you would expect given the abundance of Cryptocarya in the habitat. So as you can see here, only Lemur rufifrons is the only one that disperses a lot of seeds near adult conspecific trees. But the other 2 species, the dispersal under conspecific was not different from what you would expect. And so these patterns of seed dispersal were important for this plant species because seedling survival and recruitment were better in areas with low canopies and away from parent plants and conspecifics. So the result I'm showing on the graph here is based on an experiment in which we planted seeds in different microhabitat types. So the 3 types I showed earlier, where we had the gap, medium shaded, and the shaded areas. And we also planted seeds on the near conspecific trees. And so as a result of this experiment, we found higher sapling recruitment in gaps, as shown in blue over here, than in any other microhabitat type. And even when we were controlling for canopy cover, we also found that the recruitment was lower near conspecific than heterospecific trees. So that's why we see this difference in the result of the recruitment for the seeds dispersed by these free lemur species. So the next point is about the impact of seed dispersal on plants at the community level. So one way that seed dispersal by frugivores may impact plants in a community context is that they are biasing seed dispersal near certain adult plant species in the ecosystem, for example, under certain fruiting trees. So these frugivores, because they're eating fruits, they tend to spend a large proportion of their time foraging for fruits and hanging around fruiting trees. And they may also have some tendency to defecate while they're foraging or even between feeding bouts. And so because of that behavior, they may bias seed dispersal near fruiting trees where they recently fed. And so this has actually been the case for some seed dispersing frugivores. For the case of these lemurs, when we were looking at whether these lemurs would tend to disperse seeds on the fruiting food trees, we also found the case. That was the case. So as you can see on the graph here, the y-axis corresponds to the mean percentage of seed dispersal near fruiting trees as compared to random expectation, which the random expectation is based on the density of trees that are fruiting in their territory at any given time of the observation. So as you can see here, all free lemur species tend to deposit seeds near feeding trees that are fruiting, where they recently fed, more than you would expect by chance. So this behavior of using fruiting trees as seed dispersal foci could result in non-random association between the dispersed seed and their adult neighbor. So for example, if let's say these two plant species are fruiting at the same time and they have the same lemur seed dispersers, their seeds will be dispersed under each other because that lemur species would be like eating on one tree and then going on the next and then defecate while they are feeding on that next tree. And so we were looking at how this non-random pattern of seed dispersal that were driven by the attraction of the lemur frugivore to the fruiting trees would influence the phylogenetic relatedness between seeds and the adult neighbor. Basically, we wanted to know if the seeds that were dispersed by lemurs would land under certain fruiting trees in the landscape that might be phylogenetically related to them. We were interested in the pattern of phylogenetic relatedness between the dispersed seed and its adult neighbor, because one of the reasons that the identity of adult may influence seedling establishment is because of phylogenetic relatedness. So basically, the probabilities of seedling establishment may be predicted by the phylogenetic relatedness between the seeds and their adult neighbor, whether the seed of this person that are phylogenetically close or distant relative adult tree. Because closely related species tend to have similar traits associated with certain biotic and abiotic factors. And we measured phylogenetic relatedness in terms of nearest taxa index, which measures the phylogenetic distance between the seed and the adult, and then compare that with a mean phylogenetic distance from random pairs of seed and adult that were randomly selected from a seed pool and an adult pool of species. And what we found was that in some months, the seeds ended up near adult trees that were closely related to them. But in other months, the seeds were deposited near distantly related adult trees. But sometimes some seeds randomly ended up near trees that were neither less nor more related to them. So one reason we might see this fluctuating pattern as well is maybe because the phylogenetic structure of co-fruiting plants also vary through time, meaning that in some months, the species that are fruiting at the same time are more closely related. And in other months, they are more distantly related. And because the lemurs will eat the plant species that are fruiting in that month, the relationship, the phylogenetic relatedness between this adult tree will determine the pattern of the relationship between the seed and the adult where it ends, where it next, the adult where next to where the seed lands. And these seed adult associations could be critical because the proximity of the seed with other plants could influence its interactions with both biotic and abiotic environment, as well as its survival and recruitment success. So this non-random pattern could mean that the seed that end up near a closely related adult tree may thrive because it has the similar trait to tolerate the habitat, the environment where the adult is. On the other hand, it could also face similar natural enemies as the adult species. So for example, similar seed predators or some pathogens, so it may not survive. But this is a future area that I would like to explore more to see what would happen to the seed. And so just a summary of the main finding for the first point, we found that lemur foraging behavior can influence the spatial, temporal, and phylogenetic pattern of seed dispersal. We also found that this non-random seed dispersal by the free lemur species can influence the recruitment of the plant that they consume in such a way that it was higher for seeds non-randomly dispersed than seeds that were dropped under the parent tree. And finally, we also found that by using fruiting trees as seed dispersal foci, the lemur frugivore structure early stage interactions of the seed and the adult trees, and that result in biased pattern of phylogenetic relatedness of the seed tree association, which is crucial for the establishment and survival of the seed. So basically, the non-random dispersal of seeds by these lemur frugivores had some impact on plants at both the population and community levels. And given such important role, their loss could have some cascading impact on the ecosystem. So the next point I will talk about is the consequence of losing lemur seed dispersers. This is an important topic because about 96% of the 112 extant lemur species are currently threatened to extinction, making them one of the most threatened mammal groups on Earth. The free lemur species focus of my research are categorized as vulnerable and critically endangered by IUCN with decreasing population. Since their seed dispersal service can have critical impact on the demography of the plants that they interact with, as we've seen earlier, losing these lemurs could have some cascading impact on the ecosystem. So for example, it could affect the ability of the forest to provide vital goods and services to human society. The absence of these key dispersers from an area could also affect the structure and regeneration pattern of the forest. So we set to look at this impact. So I'm going to talk about these two impacts. The first point is the impact on the ability of the forest to provide important ecosystem services. So specifically looking at the impact of on the forest potential to store above ground carbon. So to test that, we did this via simulations because we cannot just remove the lemurs from a certain forest. So for the simulation, we would simulate the loss of large-sized lemurs by removing large seeded plant species that are dispersed by these lemurs, and then replacing them with whatever plant species are remaining in the community. So we did the removal of trees and replacing at an increasing percentage from 25 to 100%. And we run this 1,000 times. And at each time of the simulation, we will calculate a carbon balance between the carbon at the initial community where we have all the plant species and the final community where we already removed some of the large seeded lemur dispersed trees and replacing them. So as a result to that, we found that the loss of the individuals of large seeded tree species that are dispersed by lemurs was associated with a decrease in carbon storage. So as you can see on the graph on the right here. Also, the percentage of lemur dispersed trees removed, and as we increase the percentage of trees removed and replaced, the relative percentage of the change also increases. And this is interesting because when we randomly remove and replace the trees, regardless of their seed size or their dispersal mode, so we didn't care whether the plant was dispersed by lemurs or birds, or the size of the seeds are small or large, we just randomly remove and replace the trees. The forest capacity for carbon storage remained relatively unchanged, regardless of the percentage of individuals removed, whether we remove 25 or 100%. One of the main reasons for the patterns that we just observed was because there is a strong relationship between seed size and plant traits related to carbon storage. So as you can see on the graph here, seed length is positively associated with wood density and tree diameter, regardless of the dispersal mode. And so this suggests that large seeded trees have higher above ground biomass in this system. And what's even more interesting is that the large seeded species, so the one like more than 10 millimeter, and also like with high wood density and large diameter, are all lemur dispersed. So like with the lemur dispersed are the blue dots here, and as you can see, the large seeded ones with high wood density and larger trunk are all lemur dispersed. This pattern of decline in carbon storage that we found for this system in Madagascar is similar to what was also observed in other systems across the tropics, especially for the ecosystem in Tanzania and in Cameroon, where the large seeded trees also tend to have a bigger volume and higher root density than small seeded trees and abiotic trees. Another potential impact of the absence of certain seed dispersers from an area could be some changes on the structure and regeneration pattern of the forest. So we attempted to address this by examining how does the absence of large-bodied frugivore in the age of the forest as a result of habitat fragmentation reflect the pattern of seed dispersal. And this will ultimately determine the structure of the forest and regeneration. So basically, the creation of age as a result of habitat fragmentation can result in changes in both animal and plant communities. And this may be a result of species tolerances to environmental condition, some predation pressure, or difference in the resources that are available in this habitat. And these changes in the floral and faunal communities may affect the dynamics of species interactions by influencing what type of seeds can arrive at the edge of the forest, and in terms of their size and what species would arrive there as well. So for example, the different environmental conditions at the edge of the forest may lead to avoidance of the area by large-bodied frugivores. And so that may result in some large seeded species not being dispersed into the edge habitat. So to address this point, we moved away a little bit from Ranmafana National Park. So just a reminder, Ranmafana was somewhere over here. And instead, we did the field work in the rainforest of Youth over here, as it has some fragmented landscape that would be a good place to address the question. The protection of this forest is partly overseen by a community-based management, but there are still some intense anthropogenic pressure that persists. So some unmanaged shift in agricultural practice, some logging and even hunting. And the forest is bordered by like a small expanse of successional field next to a small scale agricultural field, mostly rice field. And I did something even more different from what I'm used to at this time, because instead of focusing on seed dispersal by lemurs only, we were also including the seed dispersal by birds to have a bigger picture of the impact of changes in dispersal community on seed dispersal pattern. And even though only a large proportion of the plant species might have been dispersed by birds, but we want to have the big picture of the community. And so we surveyed the bird and lemur communities in the area and found that some species were observed in the interior habitat of the forest only. And so specifically like some large-sized lemur frugivores and large-sized pigeons were only observed in the interior habitat of the forest. And what's even more interesting is that the age habitat was frequented by small-sized species, like the mouse lemurs that are like the smallest primates, the smallest lemurs in Madagascar, and we are also so like the Malagasy bulbul, which is also a very small bird in Madagascar. And to determine the impact of these differences in the community of the animals in the forest on seed dispersal pattern, we collected seed rain using some sort of traps, like that looks like a little basket like this, that we hang out in the forest for a year at the forest edge and in the interior of the forest. And then we will come back and check the content and measure the seeds and determine the species and whether they were dispersed by animals or they just fall down from a tree nearby. And so we found that overall, the seeds that were actively dispersed by animals in the forest edge habitat were smaller in size than seeds that were dispersed in the forest interior. And as you can see on the graph here, the forest edge received a higher proportion of small seeds that were dispersed from the interior habitat, which had a higher proportion of the medium-sized seeds. What this means is that a small number of frugivores may act as a potential biotic filter, acting on seed size for the arrival of certain plant species to the edge habitat. And in addition to that, we also found that the forest edge received a lower rate of animal-mediated seed dispersal compared to the interior habitat. And so this could be a result of the fact that most of the highly frugivorous seed dispersers were less frequent at the edge of the forest. So, just to summarize the main finding for the consequence of the loss of seed disperser, we found some potential changes in the forest potential to store above ground carbon. And also we found that the absence of key seed dispersers could limit the arrival of certain plant species into a certain area, which would ultimately influence forest structure and regeneration pattern. To summarize all the points I presented today, we can conclude that the foraging behavior of the frugivores influence the spatial, temporal, and phylogenetic pattern of seed dispersal. And these patterns can have positive impact on plant diversity, species coexistence, and ecosystem function. So losing these frugivores and other key dispersers can have negative impact on plants and the forest ecosystem as a whole at multiple scales. And so that's what I've been doing in the past few years. And there are still a lot of questions that I want to ask, that I want to look at regarding the role and impact of lemur frugivores as seed dispersers, as well as the potential impact of their loss. So my lab is still working on this topic and other points along the line of lemur ecology and conservation. We're also planning to expand the lab focus to include howler monkeys in Mexico, in addition to studying lemurs, but that's another talk for another time. So I'll end to this talk here. And so there are many people I'd like to thank for making all of the research I presented today happen. And also thank you all in there listening to me. And yeah, so I'll take any questions that you might have.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking Uns for a wonderful talk. And you can either unmute yourself and ask questions or put them in the chat.
Yeah, great talk. So exciting to always hear about so many different things that you're doing. I guess that very last plot, you were talking about seed size at the edge, the forest edge, and it looked like bimodal. Like, what were those really large seeds at the edge?
Ooh, then I can't think of the name of the species, but they're the large one. They may have like some cryptocarya in there. I forgot the name of the species. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no,
It was
worries.
like a lot of different species, like more than hundreds of different species.
And I guess just more a general question, but I guess it seems like most of the lemurs are just essentially fruit generalists. Like, are there any like specific like tree species and lemur species interactions where if those lemurs go extinct, do we just completely lose that species from the forest?
We haven't found that yet, but now we've amassed this big database of lemur eating fruits, and like across Madagascar, we have now like 50 different species. And so looking at like what plant species they have, like they've eaten or dispersed. So we're trying to figure out that question actually and see if there is one particular plant species that is being only dispersed by one particular species. So it's working the way, but with this lemur species here, I haven't found that, like one plant species, just relying on one species of lemur. Actually, yeah, I'm trying to think, but like there is one, I don't know if you know the Canarium, large-sized plant, a large seeded plant that is being dispersed only by the large ones. So I guess, but still it's not just one particular lemur species though.
Becca, it looks like you have a question.
Yeah, thank you, Uns, for sharing your research. When you were talking about the first topics, I started thinking about the whole dispersion process from the seeds point of view. Do you have any information on like, are the seeds manipulating the digestive process of the lemurs? Like, do they give, like, depending on what kind of chemicals they contain, can they control how fast the lemur excretes it?
I actually don't know, but that's interesting and I wanna look at that. I know like some seeds pass really fast, but some takes a little longer before getting out.
I guess I wonder
don't know what the chemistry behind that is.
Yeah, I guess I wonder like if there's a clear advantage or disadvantage to like waiting to be defecated if they're manipulating that.
For some of them, when they pass through the gut, they get there are some scarification on the seed, so that may help with their germination. Yeah.
Cool.
Because it like opens up a little bit of the seed, so they're able to sprout.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome.
I think Ellen Sims was next. She has a question in the chat. Do lemurs ever consume the seeds themselves? Is there any evidence that trees mass produce fruits?
Mass produce. Oh, I want to see the question too. I haven't, I don't know if there has been any studies of looking at mass producing fruits in this rainforest, and I'm not aware of any of the plant species I work on that mass produce fruits. What do you mean? Oh, the seeds by themselves. Yes, sometimes they will take out the pulp and take the seed, but it doesn't happen a lot. Most of the time it's the whole thing. And sometimes they may just eat the pulp, the outer part of the seed, and not eating the seed. I don't know if that makes sense. Just the fleshy part. Sometimes they will do that.
Ammon?
Thanks for an interesting talk. I was curious about the pattern that you showed where the big-bodied lemurs are staying kind of more interior to the forest and you only get the smaller ones on the outside. Is that because they're afraid of the gap, the edge habitat, or is it that there's not enough different fruiting species to maintain them across the whole year?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I keep saying this is going to be our next project, but actually that's our next project is looking at what exactly is like leading to that pattern. But yeah, one of my hypotheses on that would be because there are not enough fruits for them at the edge of the forest, but also it could be because we have some like villages very close to the edge. So maybe they just try to avoid the human the interactions with the humans. And the small ones, because the small ones eat like, they're omnivores, so they practically eat everything. And so they may not really care about not having a lot of fruits at the edge, so they will be fine. And they're nocturnal too, so maybe they're okay with the humans close by because the humans don't really go at night. But yeah, we're planning on doing like testing some hypotheses, looking at that.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Eileen?
I actually just wanted to follow up on Becca's comment. I had kind of the same question, but didn't quite connect with the gut manipulation piece. But from some of your early slides, also was wondering, you know, if what are the lemurs doing on an individual behavioral level to determine where seeds get deposited, since it wasn't random? You know, it looked like more prevalent in gaps, doing more seed deposition in gaps. Maybe Becca provided the answer.
Because of the chemistry in the digestive system, maybe, and adding the microhabitat in there as well. So it's like everything all tying together in some ways.
Yeah, thanks.
I was also curious about this observation of depositing seeds in gaps. That seemed counterintuitive to me. So are they coming down out of the trees to defecate and going into gaps? And why would they do that?
So these are not like really wide gaps. These are like a couple like gaps in the canopy. So they are still on the trees, but like the trees are not so super next to each other, leaving some gaps in the canopy. And so they always defecate on trees, and they rarely go on ground. At least this lemur species, there are some lemur species that go on ground, but this one, they may go there for like a few seconds or to eat on some dirt or something and then go back.
I was also curious, you showed this movement patterns of individuals over the course of a day. What do you know about how far they move in their lifetime?
In their lifetime?
Yeah, do you have any estimates of sort of average lifetime dispersal?
No, I don't. But yeah, I would have to follow them their lifetime, I guess, but yeah.
You have a question from Michelle. Do lemurs mostly hang, this is in the chat, do lemurs mostly hang out in the gaps? do they spend a non-random amount of time in those areas in general or in the other area types?
I think it relates a little bit to the question earlier. So they hang out in, like, again, these are like not think about like really open gaps, but like a couple like opening in the canopy of the forest. And so some of these lemur species are found in both the primary forest and more secondary forest. So the secondary forest has a little bit more opening than the primary forest. So the ones that hang out in the secondary forest, they will like mostly hang out in more open area than the one in the primary ones. Does that answer your question, Michelle?
And then Becca, did you want to follow up? You have a comment about caffeine?
I was just thinking about this. I'm sure some people have studied these questions about how seeds manipulate behavior, but I don't know anything about that.
It could be also be the whatever is in the pulp of the fruit, not the seed per se, because they eat the whole fruit. So this like it might have some fiber or something that may help with the digestion.
That's totally true. Yeah. Yeah, I guess I was saying seed, but thinking the whole shebang.
Oh, fruits.
No, you're right. Very cool. Very cool system.
Okay, any other questions? Well, if not, thanks again for a wonderful talk. Amazing animals, great system, and a nice mixture of ecology, behavior, and evolution. So thank you.
Thank you. Bye.